Today, I will present a high-level overview of the NTIG grant program. You can get more details by referring to the Request for Grant Application or RFGA found on the program website. The presentation and sample application walkthrough will be recorded, and this recording will be posted on the agency's YouTube channel. The link to this recording will also be posted on the NTIG webpage when the program opens. The question and answer portion of the webinar will not be recorded. For this presentation, your microphones, cameras, and the chat will be disabled. At the end of the presentation and sample application walkthrough, we will have time for questions. During the question period, your microphone will be enabled and you can use the raised hand function in Teams. We will call on you by name to unmute you so that you may ask your questions. If possible, please write down the slide number or title to which your question refers. We will do our best to answer any questions that you may have at the end of our webinar presentation. The NTIG program provides financial incentives to offset the incremental cost of emission reduction of pollutants from facilities and other stationary sources in Texas. For agenda today, we will begin with program highlights and go over program requirements, including the 3 eligible project categories. Next, we will discuss eligible and ineligible expenses and the basic grant process. This includes reimbursement, reporting, and ensuring contract compliance. After my part of the presentation, Joe Hansberger will walk us through the application before having time for questions at the end. This grant round, NTIG has $16.5 million in funding available, with $1 million set aside for electricity storage projects. 3 categories of projects are eligible under this program. NTIG is a competitive statewide program where we compare applications against one another and score them for selection after the closing date. We'll cover scoring criteria later in this presentation. There will be a 128-day window to submit applications. Eligible applicants, including individuals, state and local governments, corporations, or other legal entities. All business entities, such as corporations or partnerships, must have an active registration with the Texas Secretary of State by the program opening date. It must also maintain any active registration throughout your contract period if they are selected for a grant. Applicants must be the owner or operator of a stationary source located in the state of Texas that emits pollutants. Applicants who are not owners of the facility must provide evidence of operational control for the duration of the contract. Applicants may also be the owner or operator of electricity storage projects related to renewable energy. Any apparent, potential, or actual conflict of interest to TCQ must be disclosed in writing at the time an application is submitted. For this program, new technology is defined as emission control technology that results in emission reduction that exceeds state or federal requirement in effect of effect at the time of submission of an NTIG application. Eligible project categories include electricity storage projects related to renewable energy, new technology projects that reduce emission of regulated pollutants from stationary sources, and new technology projects that reduce emissions from upstream, midstream, and downstream oil and gas industry activities, including production, completion, gathering, storage, processing, transmission, and refining activities. A project is not eligible if it is already required by state or federal law, rule, regulation, memorandum of agreement, or other binding document, unless approved by TCQ. NTIG is not intended to fund proven technology to help reduce emission beyond what is required by state or federal requirements. This program is not for the research and development of technology. For stationary sources and oil and gas projects, the applicant must have continuously owned or leased the facility or equipment for the 2 years immediately preceding the application signature date. Additionally, Additionally, the equipment must have been continuously located and operated in Texas in its primary function for the 2 years immediately preceding the application signature date. For all project categories, the applicant must demonstrate reasonable evidence that the proposed technology is capable of providing a significant reduction in emissions. For emission reduction capability, applicants must also address the process used by the facility, the fuel or feedstock use, and other attributes of the project that enhance this capability. Any claim of emission reductions must be supported by the information provided in the application, and all calculations should be thoroughly documented in the application. The applicant must also demonstrate a net reduction of actual emission for regulated pollutants affected by the project. The applicant must demonstrate an achievable reduction from the baseline emission adopted by TCQ for the relevant source. If the project would reduce emissions but would also increase other emissions, the applicant needs to if the project would reduce emissions but would also increase other emissions, the applicant needs to specify what emissions are increasing and explain how this increase in good engineering practice and is still protective of national ambient air quality standards, public health and welfare, and physical property. Projected emissions must not exceed any applicable requirements for the facility. Let's get into the specifics for the 3 project categories. Activities eligible for funding under our first category must pose an electricity storage project with rated power 1 megawatt or greater and clearly demonstrate that it is related to renewable energy in Texas. These projects may include electricity storage projects from wind, solar, hydrogen, or other renewable generations that provide an efficient means of making stored energy available during periods of peak energy use. Renewable energy sources tied to electricity storage projects must be owned by the applicant or leased at the time of application submittal and be documented as part of the application. The renewable energy must be generated from the project itself and cannot be purchased from the grid. Electricity storage projects related to renewable energy may include lithium-ion batteries, energy-related flywheels, compressed air energy storage, pumped hydropower or other gravity batteries, and sodium sulfur storage batteries. The second project category is for projects that reduce emission of regulated pollutants from stationary sources. A few examples of stationary sources include asphalt plants, cement kilns, power plants, and boilers. Applicants for these projects must be the owner or operator of the facility and have an active authorization for the source at the time of application unless the applicant can affirmably demonstrate that the source is not required to be permitted. However, as I mentioned before, the project you are applying for cannot be equipment that is already required to be into compliance for that authorization. For the purpose of this program, engines or other emission sources mounted on trailers are not considered stationary sources. The third project category is for projects that reduce currently authorized or permitted emissions from upstream, midstream, or downstream oil and gas activities, including production, completion, gathering, storage, processing, transmission, and refining through the following methods. The replacement or repower of stationary compressor engines or the retrofit, add-on, or other in situ emissions reduction technology on stationary compressor engines. The installation system to reduce or eliminate loss of gas, flaring of gas, or burning of gas using combustion control devices, and the installation of systems to reduce flaring emissions and other site emissions. Next, we will discuss some general requirements for all oil and gas projects, followed by additional requirements for compressor engines. Applicants must be the owner or operator of the facility. Applications may only include projects from the same county and are limited to 100 activities per grant application. Projects spanning multiple counties or projects with more than 100 activities in the same county will need to be split into multiple applications. Once again, engines or other emission sources mounted on trailers are not considered stationary sources in this program. These requirements are standard for oil and gas projects under NTIG. However, I want to emphasize that stationary compressor engine projects do have some additional requirements. We will go over few other special cases for stationary compressor engine projects on the next slides. Stationary compressor engines that are being replaced, repowered, or retrofitted must have been owned or leased by the applicant and operated in Texas for the 2 years prior to the application signature date, and they must be operating condition with a maximum of 5 years of useful life remaining. The grant-funded engine must emit at least 25% less nitrogen oxide or NOx compared with the baseline emission of the original engine. This is acceptable to replacement, repower, and retrofit projects, which we'll discuss next. A stationary compressor may be replaced or repowered with a new or newer compressor. For replacement projects, the emission reductions are based on the expected future use of the original compressor compared with the use of the reduced emissions equipment. Estimated future use is determined from recent historical use and may not exceed the average annual use of the equipment being replaced for the 2 years immediately preceding the application signature date. Rebuilt or remanufactured engines must use original equipment manufacturer or OEM components and must be purchased from either the OEM or an authorized reseller. Replacement or repower engines must be of the same type and horsepower and intended for use in the same manner or vocation as the original engine. An existing engine on stationary compressor may be retrofitted by the addition of emission reduction devices onto the equipment, the modification or conversion of the engine to run on different fuel types, or the installation of an emission upgrade kit. As reminder, the grant-funded equipment must emit at least 25% less NOx than the original engine. TCQ may consider a request to waive one or more of the ownership or use requirement on a finding of good cause. This may include short lapses of continuous use in Texas due to economic conditions, seasonal work, or other circumstances. Examples of good cause for ownership requirement include situations where ownership of the company has changed, the company has changed its name or incorporation status, or if the asset of the company has been purchased by another company. The use and vocation of the facility or equipment must not have changed. Waiver requests must be completed and submitted along with the application in order to be considered. TCQ will review these waiver requests on case-by-case basis. Awarded projects will be broken into 2 phases, the implementation period and the operational period. The implementation period is when the grant equipment is purchased, installed, and placed into service. It begins when the grant contract is signed by both the applicant and TCQ, and it ends when TCQ issues the final payment of grant funds. This will be approximately 2 years. During the implementation period, grantees must submit quarterly reports to demonstrate progress in implementing the project. The operational period is the 5-year period during which the grant equipment must be operated and maintained. It begins upon completion of the implementation period. During the operational period, grantees must submit annual report on the status of the project. One quick note about marketable emission reduction credits before we move on to talking about eligible expenses. A project involving implementation of emission reduction technologies that would otherwise generate marketable credits under state or federal emission reduction credit, averaging, banking, or trading programs is not eligible for funding under this program unless the project includes the transfer of the reduction that would otherwise be marketable credits to the state implementation plan or the owner or operator as provided by Section 386 period 056 Texas Health and Code, and the reductions are permanently retired. All awarded grants will be paid on a reimbursement basis. Applicants awarded a grant must bear at least 50% of the cost to implement the project. TCQ will reimburse up to 50% of allowable eligible project costs. The following is extremely important to note. To be eligible for reimbursement, costs must be directly related to the implementation of the project and specifically detailed in the application budget forms. You will need to break out these costs into the appropriate budget category, which we'll cover on the next slide. Be sure to include all costs related to project broken down so that the partial funding could be considered. If awarded a grant, you will need to provide an itemized invoice and proof of payment, such as cancel check, wire transfer confirmation, or bank statement for all costs to qualify for reimbursement. Costs must have been paid on or after the program open date to be considered eligible. Awarded contracts will include a notice to proceed clause. We'll go into more details about the NTP later in the presentation. But I want to point out that there is no guarantee a contract will be awarded or an NTP issued. Cost incurred on or after the program open date but before a notice to proceed is issued are potentially eligible but are at the applicant's own risk until an NTP is issued. The following are eligible budget categories and how we define them. Equipment, non-construction related tangible personal property having a unit acquisition cost of $10,000 or more, including sale tax and delivery with an estimated useful life of over 1 year. Supply and material, non-construction related costs for goods and material having a unit acquisition cost including sales tax and delivery of less than $10,000. Basic items such as telephones, tools, and or office supplies are considered to be a cost of doing business and will not be refunded. Construction costs for enhancement or building of permanent facilities, including planning, designing, and engineering, materials and labor connected with the construction, subcontracts for services in connection with the construction. Contractual, non-construction related costs for subcontracted or hired out professional services or tasks provided by a firm or individual who is not employed by the applicant. Operation and maintenance, costs related to the operation and maintenance of the grant-funded technology through the end of the contract period. Again, please make sure to be very detailed on the budget forms. Indirect costs such as overhead and basic tools are not eligible please do not include any indirect costs when you are creating your budget and calculating your requested grant amount. If you are selected for a grant, these costs will not be included in your grant amount. You will not be reimbursed for them, and they cannot be counted as matching expenses either. Besides the indirect costs, there are other costs that are considered ineligible. I'll pause here so you can read this list. It is also included in the RFGA. Again, please do not include these costs as part of your budget. They will not be eligible for reimbursement or as matching. Applications must be received no later than 5 p.m. Central Time on the program closing date listed on the cover page of the request for grant applications. All applications and project proposals for funding must be submitted by the application deadline. A complete application must include all pages of the application, all required attachments, complete applicant contact information, all required signatures, all the information necessary for TCQ to score and rank the application according to the criteria listed in the RFGA. If the application is found to be incomplete, applicants will be provided a deadline to submit the missing information to TCQ. Failure to provide the missing information by the deadline may result in the application being considered ineligible. The NTIG application process is outlined here. Necessary documents such as the RFGA guidelines, example contract, application, and proposal forms and the W9 will be available on the NTIG homepage when the program opens. I will reiterate all applications must be completed to be considered for funding. Besides the application form itself, you will need to include a W9 form with the applicant's legal name, EIN or SSN, depending on your application type. Please include the EIN of the entity applying, even if it is disregarded entity. If you are applying as an individual or a sole proprietor, an unexpired state or federal issued photo ID is required. Project proposals, including a detailed implementation plan and timeline, and if applicable, the waiver request form. When completing the project implementation plan, you must detail your plan to maximize the likelihood that the technology will be implemented in Texas as soon as practicable after the application signature date. Regardless of the implementation schedule contained within the project implementation plan, if awarded a grant, TCQ will require the grant funded project to be implemented no later than April 30th, 2029. The implementation plan must also demonstrate the applicant's ability to operate and maintain the technology for the duration of the contract, including the 5-year operational reporting period. The operational period does not commence until after TCQ has paid final reimbursement. We understand that some of the documents you will send with the application will contain confidential business information. Please be aware that all information received by TCQ becomes the property of the state of Texas and as such becomes subjected to public disclosure under the Texas Public Information Act, Texas Code, Chapter 552. Information that the applicant would like to protect from public disclosure must be clearly marked with the words confidential/proprietary information applicant and seek OAG opinion before releasing on every page. We are going to move on to scoring. Applications for eligible projects will be evaluated, scored, and ranked according to the scoring criteria outlined in the RFGA. Projects that are most aligned with the program goals will receive more program alignment points. If the cost effectiveness and emission reductions are comparable, TCQ will give preference to projects that meet these criteria. Projects that meet more than one of these criteria will be given greater preference for selection. So, if you believe your project meets some of these, make sure to emphasize that in your proposal. I will wait a moment before going to the next slide. This slide is a breakdown of scoring criteria for electricity storage projects. Proposals will be scored based on information provided in project proposal. The maximum possible score will equal 100. Please note that this is the one category that does not have location component. Here is the scoring breakdown for stationary source projects. Proposals will be scored based on information provided in the project proposal. The maximum possible score will equal 100. Please note that this category does have a location component. We will go over the location component on the next slide. This is a map of the non-attainment areas and affected counties in Texas. Although we will be accepting applications for projects statewide, stationary source projects located in the highlighted counties may be awarded up to 10 points for their location. If the project is located within a non-attainment area, that project would receive 10 points for their location score. If the project is located in an affected county, that project would score 5 points for their location. Finally, this is the scoring breakdown for oil and gas projects. Again, proposals will be scored based on information provided in the project proposal. The maximum possible score will equal 100. Please note that this category does have location component. We will go over the location component on the next slide. This is a map of the clean transport zone. Although we will be accepting applications from projects statewide. For oil and gas applications, projects located in the highlighted counties may be awarded 10 points for their location. Successful applicants will be notified of their selection and the amount of grant funds that may be awarded. If selected, the applicant will be required to sign a contract with TCQ. We strongly encourage you to review the example contract on NTIG's website. Any changes to the draft contract must be submitted in writing with the application. TCQ will not normally change the contract language in response to individual requests from grant recipients and is under no obligation to do so. Requesting to negotiate contract terms may delay awarding of the grant, and TCQ may rescind an award if both parties are unable to come to a mutual agreement. The implementation plan will become the contract scope of work. Grant recipients commit to taking all actions necessary to ensure the successful completion of their project within the contract's timeframes and funding limitations. As I mentioned before, grant contracts will include a notice to proceed clause. Signing the contract is not the final commitment required by TCQ to provide the funds. Any expenses incurred by the grantee prior to receiving the NTP will be at the grantee's own risk. The notice to proceed provides approval to begin the grant activities. To receive the NTP, grantees must submit proof of insurance and a site host agreement or site ownership documentation to TCQ within 1 year of contract execution. Refer to Section 4.9 of the RFGA for more details about this documentation. Again, all grants are paid on a reimbursement basis. Grant funds will not be disbursed without a request for reimbursement or RFR. We must have a notice to proceed. You must have a notice to proceed before you can submit an RFR. When filing out the RFR form, ensure that costs are clearly allocated to grant activities and fall under the appropriate budget category as listed in your contract. Use plain language to describe how each cost aligns with the project budget. You must provide documentation with the RFR to show that equipment or services have been received and costs have been paid in full. This includes an itemized invoice and proof of payment such as a cancelled check, bank statement, or wire transfer confirmation for each cost included on the RFR. Internal accounting records can support documentation of batch payment but are insufficient as standalone proof of payment. The name listed on invoices and proof of payment must match the name on the grant contract. Please keep this in mind as you are implementing your project. The final RFR must be submitted by the RFR deadline listed on your contract, which is April 30th, 2029. Please note that 10% of the total grant amount will be withheld until the facility goes into operation and the final implementation report is approved by TCQ. You will need to submit a request for retained funds. If awarded a grant, you will be expected to report throughout the life of the contract. All reports will be posted on the NTIG web page. Reports should be easily understandable to the general public, although, although technical attachments may include as necessary. During the implementation period, grantees will submit quarterly reports demonstrating progress in implementing the project, even if there were no expenses incurred that quarter. Grantees will submit a final implementation report once the project is fully implemented and the facility is operational. This report must be approved before TCQ will issue the final grant funds, including any retainage. TCQ issuing the final grant fund is what triggers the operational period. During the operational period, grantee will report annually on the status of the project. As a reminder, the operational period is 5 years. During the contract period, a grantee must do a number of things, including proceeding in good faith with all steps necessary towards project implementation as outlined in the project proposal, and with all reasonable steps necessary to ensure the project's successful implementation. Obtain and maintain successful insurance as outlined in the contract. Submit timely, complete, and accurate requests for reimbursement, reporting, and deliverable documentation. Maintain operational control of the grant equipment for the 5 years operational period, which again begins upon issuance of the final grant funds. Maintain the grant equipment in proper operating condition and make any necessary requirements to keep it in proper operating condition. Maintain grant equipment records for 4 years after the contract terminates. Failure to meet the obligations of the contract may result in termination of the contract and the return of all or prorated share of the grant funds. TCQ preferred method to submit your application is through TCQ secure site. Details and a link can be found on the program web page. Applications may also be submitted via standard and express mail. I would like to emphasize again that the application period ends at 5 p.m. Central Time on the program closing date listed on the cover page of the RFGA. We have finished the program overview portion of this webinar. Again, my name is Chamini Kodituaku. I am now going to turn it over to Joe Hansberger, who will walk us through the application. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Hansberger, and I will be providing you a walkthrough of the application form and project proposal instructions. For the sake of time, we will only be covering the highlights of the project proposal instructions for electricity storage projects. Remember, there are 3 project categories, and each one has its own project proposal instructions. Be sure you select the appropriate one for your project. Also, please note the application and proposal instructions are still in draft form, and there may be minor changes between now and when the program opens. Now let's get started. All NTIG applications, regardless of project type, are required to fill out the project application form. The application form can be found on the NTIG webpage when the project opens. This is the cover page of the application form. It includes submissions, instructions, and important dates. Section 1 is for applicant information. This is where you will provide basic information about the entity applying for the grant, as well as contact information. This first part is where you will enter the legal name of the entity applying for the grant. This is the name that the contract will be under. The name must match the name listed on the W-9. Next, you will select an ownership type from the drop-down and enter the EIN for the entity applying for the grant, even if you're considered a disregarded entity. Next, you will provide contact information for the authorized official, or AO. This is the individual who has the authority to sign legal documents and requests for reimbursement on behalf of the applicant. Please be sure to fill this section in completely, including the primary phone number, email address, and mailing address. The last part of Section 1 is where you will provide contact information for the designated project representative, or DPR. The DPR is the individual authorized to give and receive communications and directions on behalf of the applicant. If the DPR and AO are the same person, please submit yes from the drop-down menu and proceed to Section 2. If the DPR and AO are not the same person, please fill out this section completely, including a primary phone number, email address, and mailing address for the DPR. Section 2 is the third-party preparer signature page. If the application was not completed by a third party, you should select No from the drop-down menu and move on to Section 3. However, if a third party is preparing the application, they must fill this page out in its entirety. A signature is also required. Please note the asterisk at the bottom of the page regarding electronic signatures. You will not be able to edit the application once an electronic signature is added. Section 3 is the certification of eligibility to receive a state-funded grant. In this section, you will select one of the 4 applicant options. Please complete the Social Security portion only if option 1 or 2 apply to you. If either option 3 or 4 in this section apply to you, names and Social Security numbers are not required. Section 4 is the Health, Safety, and Environmental Impact Certifications. In this section, you will select one option in each table. The first table is the Health and Safety Risk Assessment table. If you are not aware of any safety or health issues that might arise from the implementation, testing, or use of the proposed technology, then the first should be selected. If you are aware of any safety or health risks that might arise from the implementation, testing, or use of the proposed technology, then the second box needs to be selected, and you must identify the safety or health risks in the application. The second table is the Environmental Impact Certification table. If you are not aware of any adverse environmental impacts, such as increased emissions of pollutants or the creation of a hazardous waste that might arise from the implementation, testing, or use of the proposed technology, then the first should be selected. If you are aware of one or more adverse environmental impacts, such as increased emissions of pollutants or creation of a hazardous waste that might arise from the implementation, testing, or use of the proposed technology, then the second box needs to be selected, and you must identify the issues in the project proposal. Section 5 is the overall project budget summary page. On this page, you will list all project costs by budget category and total them up. The numbers entered in this table should match the total estimated eligible costs for each budget category, which is found at the bottom of section 5.1 through 5.5. As such, we recommend completing section 5.1 through 5.5 before tackling this first table. Once you have your total project cost, you will need to enter your requested grant amount for reimbursement. This cannot exceed 50% of the total project costs. The last thing you will need to enter on this page is the amount of any additional financial incentives that you have received or expect to receive. Sections 5.1 through 5.5 are the individual budget category tables. There is a table for each budget category that Sharmini covered earlier. You will need to enter all eligible costs for that budget category in the corresponding table. Please use this language to describe the cost and its purpose in implementing the project. Refer to Section 3.3 of the RFGA for information regarding ineligible costs. If needed, include additional pages of the table. Enter the subtotal of costs listed on each page and the total estimated eligible costs for each budget category. This is the number that you will enter on the overall budget. Section 6 covers program certifications. The next several pages have specific certifications that you must read and agree to. Please read these provisions carefully. By signing the application, you are agreeing that you understand and certify compliance with all of the statements in Section 6. Note that this screen capture is for presentation purposes only and does not contain or outline all certifications that you will find in the application. Section 7 is the project summary page. Enter the legal name, entity type, and mailing address in the first table. The second table is where you will enter project information. Please note that you can only select one project type. Different project types require separate applications. For the project total cost and total requested grant amount, you will enter the corresponding numbers from the project budget summary. Remember, the total requested grant amount may not exceed 50% of the project total cost. The authorized official will need to sign and date at the bottom of the project summary page. Again, please ensure the application is filled in completely before utilizing an electronic signature, or you will be locked out of making any additional changes to the application. Section 8 is the application checklist. You may use this checklist to ensure that all sections of the application are complete and all required attachments are included. Please include this page with your application, even if it's left blank. We made it through the application form. Next, we'll briefly discuss the project proposal instructions. Remember, there are 3 project types, and each one has its own proposal instructions. Make sure you download the correct proposal instructions for your project type. These are also found on the NTIG webpage. For this example, we are using the electricity storage project proposal instructions. For the sake of time, we won't cover every section, but there are a few specific sections that I want to highlight that are applicable to all project categories. You must submit a proposal using the sections and subsections of the proposal instructions as an outline. We need full and complete answers to all questions, but we don't want to search for the answers through pages and pages of text. We want you to tailor your proposal toward our grant. Keep in mind, the project summary questions and implementation outline are general for each project category, are geared for each project category. This screen capture is from page 2 of the electricity storage project proposal instructions and does not include all of the questions for you to answer. The next section I want to emphasize is the implementation plan outline. If awarded a grant, your implementation plan outline will be used to develop your scope of work, so please make this as detailed and accurate as possible. Please note that this screen capture does not include the entire outline, only a portion of page 4 of the electricity storage project proposal instructions. You must use the template provided in this section when drafting your implementation plan. The template breaks each task into an objective, detailed steps to be taken, a schedule for the task to be completed, and deliverables of significant results from the work detailed in this task, and documentation that demonstrates the task has been completed. We would like to have hard dates for the start of the project, but task schedules should be timed from the project start date in months. If you are awarded a grant and things change regarding your implementation plan, you must notify us. A contract change may be required. If the change affects any scored components, we may reject the change if the modified project would no longer have been competitively selected. This is the first task in the template we just discussed. Task 1 is the implementation period reporting is identical for all grants. You can see here that the objective for Task 1 is to prepare and submit detailed quarterly progress reports during the implementation period and a final implementation report. The steps involved are to coordinate all project resources to ensure compliance with program requirements while providing deliverables on schedule and according to the budget, generate quarterly reports, progress reports, and the final report verifying final completion of the facility and create a public web page. Next, you can see there's a schedule for completing the reports and the web page. Finally, there is a list of deliverables. We've talked about these reports earlier in the presentation, but I want to make a note about the web page. For the web page, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a page that describes your NTIG project, funding, and point of contact for the project. We would like the NTIG page to be on your main web page or link to your main page and be available during your implementation phase of your project. Task 1 mentions that the grantee's final notice to proceed will not be issued until we receive property rights and insurance. The sample contract found on the NTIG website contains examples, types, and amounts of insurance required for a project funded under the NTIG program. Insurance will be required during your contract period. The next few tasks will be dependent on your project type and very specific to your particular project. The last task I want to discuss is for operation period reporting. For electricity storage project, this falls under task 9, but it is task 8 for the other project types. Regardless, this task is identical for all grants. This task, it requires you to prepare the project for the 5-year operating period and to report annually on its status. Remember, the operating period does not begin until the date TCEQ issues the final payment of grant funds. You will need to use this reporting template that TCEQ will provide you for your annual operation status reports and your final operation report. All implementation and operation reports will be posted to the NTIG webpage. Reports should be easily understandable by the general public, although technical attachments may also be included as necessary. The very last thing I want to cover in the proposal instruction is the timeline. When creating your timeline, keep in mind the purchase expiration deadline is April the 30th, 2029. For stationary source and electricity storage project, this will be the end of the proposal instructions. But for new technology oil and gas projects, there is an additional page which is required and covers additional information and requirements for compressor engine replacements, repowers, or retrofits. We've made it through the application and proposal instructions walkthrough. I encourage you to sign up for email updates by going to our webpage and clicking subscribe to our TERP Hot Topics email list.